Hey guys, welcome to this episode of Flux Navigators. In the last episode, we were joined by my friend and founder of New York City production company Honto 88, Shruti Ganguly, who talked about the inception of her company, her inspirations, and her current obsessions. Today, we're going to delve a little bit deeper into Shruti's journey and find out what made her the multi-hyphenate professional that she is. And of course, we're going to talk about 73 questions. And Shruti, you want to tell us a little bit more about what happened after that?
Absolutely. I mean, at this point, 73 questions became a huge success for not just Vogue, but for Condé Nast in general.
Mm-hmm.
And the director was suddenly hailed as a genius internally and was brought on to make various other pieces of content. But I'll never forget when he called me soon after 73 questions and in a panic said that he had totally screwed up and that he had had a video shoot for Golf Digest with Jimmy Fallon, who essentially after 2 questions had shut him down and canceled the interview. And of course, being a producer, you kind of help, calm someone down. And I asked questions and was like, what happened? And he said, I wanted to do this video that was about him just kind of describing his favorite things, and we were going to illustrate the answers. And I was like, well, if you ask a couple of questions, I'm sure, what were the questions you asked? And he said, well, I asked him to talk about his favorite golf course. And I listened to the audio then, and I was like, listen, he talks about his ideal golf course for like a minute and a half, 2 minutes. That's all you need to illustrate the video. You just need to ask one illustrative question.
Mm-hmm.
And anyway, that ended up becoming a pilot for a series that Vanity Fair ended up putting out called Improv Imagination. And the interesting thing is Jimmy's team did not enjoy the experience of making that video, and they didn't allow it to come out at all.
Wow.
But it internally got repackaged and got pitched to other celebrities and then became Improv Imagination. And again, another high performing series for the brand. And in the meantime, the thing is, when I had been at MTV, I had been a senior producer there. And when I came to Condé Nast as a freelance producer first, I was a senior producer. But then when I got my staff contract after the success of 73 Questions, I suddenly was demoted to a producer. And I was incredibly confused because I was like, this was not what I agreed to. And I've just also produced your biggest series. And I left my other job, which had a higher title. And I was then met with a lot of, but this is, the structure that we have for you. So essentially, I made their biggest show. I got demoted and I said, listen, in 6 months, we need to renegotiate because it's not like I have another job lined up. And I put a lot of time into working on this. And so then those 6 months came and went. And I, kept bringing it up with one of my bosses. And I said, I didn't want to be that woman executive who was like shy about standing up for herself.
Right.
Which are the things you always hear about. And so I kept telling my boss, if there's anything I need to do to further prove myself, please let me know. And then what ended up happening, and I got surprised in a meeting, we all got called into an office and were told that there was going to be a restructure. And I found out at that time that I was being put in a pod and I suddenly had somebody else I had to report to. And that I wasn't actually even, getting the fulfillment of, the job that I deserved. And that the director of 73 Questions and Improv Imaginations, et cetera, was being brought in several levels above me as like, one of the development heads. So it, and so much of his success at the company had been because of the things I had worked with him on.
Right.
And it is at that moment where you recognize, systematic failures. And I then resigned. And of course, that created a big stir, especially for the HR department, who couldn't understand why. And I had to even sit them down and tell them, listen, the men who are my age have the more senior title than me.
Mm-hmm.
And the women who have that title or that position are 10 years older than me. You have to recognize that there is a gender gap.
Right.
And as one of the few people of color who was a producer there, it became, it was even more pronounced what the discrepancy was. And it's not because I didn't have enough education. I had an MFA and an MBA from NYU. I had made movies during that time that were premiering at Venice and Sundance. And I had a track record for making things that people watched. And so it wasn't because I wasn't smart enough or capable enough or any of those things. It was because places like Condé Nast are not necessarily built to really recognize and create pipelines for women of color.
Right. But do you think that could still happen now in 2021? What's your take on how things have changed?
I think that media companies and the heads of media companies say that they want these changes because they have no choice but to say that.
That's
However, true. I think that, they are actually, in fact, quite terrified more than ever to create these spaces because they know that the changes that are internal have to really be completely undone and then redone. And that is, and I've yet to see companies fully recognize that their attempts are not good enough.
It's interesting you say that because I think that there's, that demand for content that is either dealing with subjects which are more universal. And when I say more universal, I mean more like what the world looks like as opposed to what the world on screen looked like. So themes are more universal. People working on them are more universal. So that demand is definitely there. And it's great because, people like you and me and a lot of other people get to take advantage of that opportunity. And it's not like you're manipulating stuff or whatever. It's just the time that this stuff is rising up. And the question, and I often, sometimes, I wonder, and these are, this thought does come up in conversations that we're having with other people when we're either pitching or you're talking to, say, reps or agents or whatever, and that there is a mandate to make stuff happen. And sometimes I think, and the thought has definitely crossed my mind, and obviously it's crossed a lot of people's mind. Are people just doing it because it has to be done, or are people doing it because they feel it? And I think my conclusion I came to was, you know what? It doesn't really matter because it's going to happen anyway. So eventually you have to, and you'll never know because, yes, some people really want it to change. But yeah, you're right. I think that there are a lot of people who are so-called old guard who are concerned about the fact that that change will eat them up. But like with anything, if there's no sort of halfway house on this. Either you're part of the change or you are the people who are going to get change. So you have to choose your battles. And but I think it's either way. It's really fast. I think even compared to 2019. I mean, just look at, and sometimes it feels like that because we're sitting at home and just watching and consuming stuff. And so, but I feel like it's been way faster than I would have expected it to. At the same time, there's so much that's still to be done. And that's kind of, I keep feeling that way.
Right. Absolutely. I mean, one of the things that I also just have to say is that there is this fear of tokenism. Or not this fear. Let me just rephrase that. One of the things I also have to discuss is this aspect of tokenism.
Right.
Like, I know why I'm getting hired now by certain brands. I'm a woman of color. and I have the work. And so suddenly you're getting hired because of those things. I mean, mostly it's sometimes not even because of your work, because these, and I look at how brands treat women of color filmmakers, and the thing that is vastly lacking is simply trust. And if you hired me because you really saw my work, you would trust me for the work I am doing for you, and you would give me that space. But there is a real discrepancy with how it's not about getting the jobs per se. I mean, while it is also about getting the jobs, it is as much about the way in which brands or partners work with filmmakers, because they trust white male directors way more, and you see the ease with the process. So if you're just hiring women of color, people of color, LGBTQ people, just because you can say you hired them, more than that, know that you've hired them because they have something to say, and they're going to bring a fresh perspective that is built on their experience. And you got to trust them.
Absolutely.
Trust is a thing I find incredibly lacking. And I've worked with clients and, who make it every step of the way incredibly difficult. And being someone who has commissioned filmmakers, when I was at Condé Nast or MTV or Nylon, I worked with a lot of filmmakers who I hired because of their work, and specifically around, and then, because of their work. And then, of course, because of their gender and background and identity as well, based on what we were going to make. But I also trusted them. And I trusted the new ideas they were bringing. So I know when I'm in a place as a director when I'm not receiving that.
No, but it's amazing. It's super insightful to hear you say that, because, you think, and this is coming from someone who's working in a pretty quote unquote woke environment, right? And to hear that is super insightful, because it's, I wouldn't have thought of this. So thank you for sharing that. Just to sort of shift focus for a second, you grew up, you're Indian, you grew up in Oman, and then you came to the US for college. And I guess pretty much the majority of your professional life has been in the US as well. And I'm hoping that our audience listening to this are people all around the world, but are people who are connected to this entire global content revolution. And so, there will be people who are probably in discussions for projects, who are writing stuff, who are looking at showrunning stuff, who are producers, putting things together with talent in their local markets, may have done stuff locally. And what are the, I mentioned this when we went away for a break, but I really want to hear from you something that you can share with them in terms of what not to do, because you and I have talked about stuff, and obviously there might be stuff that you can't share on this podcast as well, in terms of, getting screwed over by someone or something, or a situation where you didn't take the adequate precautions, where you trusted too much, where you thought things would go a certain way. And I know I've had my fair share of those things. But what would you say not to do?
What not to do?
Or even what to do in order to avoid certain things happening?
Well, I can say the things to do: speak up when you know that the time in which you are going to speak will ultimately have the most impact. So you have to reflect on that.
Right.
And I would say the other thing to do is to create a community with other filmmakers, if they're people that look like you or people you really vibe with, who you can go to for advice. And so you can share things as they're happening to get insights and feedback. Creating that type of trust circle amongst peers is incredibly important, because we have to break through our competitiveness with other people and really focus on internal striving and excellence. And so starting by building community, even early on, is really going to help in the long run, because you get to grow with those people. And I would say what not to do would be to not, and this is harder, but it's going to be hard. It's not easy.
Right.
This space that we're in, creating within systems that are run by, commercial aspects, of course, there are things that are not necessarily in your hands. And so there's a lot of times you're going to get really disillusioned and disenchanted and you just want to quit. And obviously I would say never give up. I mean, I'm reading about the director of Minari, Lee Isaac Chung, who just won a Golden Globe for Best Foreign Language Film. He wanted to quit before he made Minari. Minari was his 5th film. And those are the stories to really recognize and learn from, because early on, you're going to be surrounded by assholes. Of course, you're going to be surrounded by old guard. You're going to be surrounded also by new people who think their ideas are better than anyone else's. And you have to just absorb and pay attention to these things and know how to protect your own little heart. Because if you are going to be in this business for a long time, you have to allow yourself to be vulnerable to make the best things. But to be vulnerable, you also have to be protective of yourself and know when to let things get to you. I mean, I can't tell you the number of people who've put me in boxes and told me the things I can't do, that I can't produce and direct, that I should just go marry my Norwegian boyfriend and then do what I want, that, you should never think of directing again unless you come up with a whole new approach. I mean, those are things. Yeah. I mean, it's been really interesting to hear when you get that type of feedback. It's incredibly crippling, but you have to fight through it. And ultimately, it's not just your vulnerability that will make you an incredible filmmaker. It's your resilience that will make you sustain a lifetime in this career.
Absolutely. I totally agree with you. And, anyone who follows you on social knows exactly what you're talking about. I mean, and I like what you said about you have to let certain things get to you, because that's part of your vulnerability. You can't just be what's the word I'm looking for? Equanimous and stoic about everything, right? It's nice to be like that, but you need to let things affect you from time to time, and you need to speak up, as you said, at the right time.
I mean, what I'm learning, and I've been doing this for a while, is when something upsets me, I pause and I have this moment of, it pains or it hurts me. Why is that? Where is that pain coming from? Let me reflect. Is this something that is stirred by my own insecurity that I have to navigate? Where is this coming from? And is this going to be worth my time to dwell on right now? Or is it going to affect the rest of my work and become a domino where I'm suddenly going to just be, putting out some, bad energy and going to get upset, and it's going to affect, everyone else on other projects unrelated to this. So you have to really pay attention to those pain points and recognize how to deal with them in a timely way, or it can affect the rest of your work.
I hear you, and I even hear the part about wanting to be cautious about not letting that go too far, but I think I need to do more of this. So thank you for that, because I am making a note to self on that subject. And on that note, I wanted to know, tell me, Shruti, what have you, I think the question actually is, what have you watched, listened to, and read? And you can answer one for each, or you can answer combined stuff or whatever it is. But over the past year that you have loved the most, or that's really moved you the most, or maybe incensed you the most, whatever it is.
Well, I am reading the most incredible book right now called Begin Again, James Baldwin's America and Its Urgent Lessons for Our Own, by Eddie S. Glaude. Jr., which is just a remarkable piece of writing. I think that James Baldwin is just, should be granted sainthood. And I mean, I think the more that I read Baldwin and watch films or clips, the more I really understand about life in general. I've been watching a lot of, last year I directed this short animation around, for the Biden Harris campaign called Try to Remember, which was
Yeah.
essentially a reflection of people who had passed in the last 4 years and use ideas that they shared as a way for people to gather around. We lost them in the last 4 years, but people like Prince or Muhammad Ali, those their legacy continues. And so Try to Remember is actually a song that Harry Belafonte sang and gave us permission to use for
Oh
the
yeah.
video.
Yeah.
And so, in the process of obviously making that video, I watched a lot of news clips with Muhammad Ali. And I am so grateful for so much of the research that filmmakers get to do when it comes to making our work, because you have to put in that time. And in that time, you get to discover not just the other person, you get to discover more about yourself in the process. And so
Absolutely.
I would just recommend going down the YouTube hole of just Muhammad Ali speeches, especially this speech he did with an Irish reporter. And it's remarkable. So
I know what you're saying because, you know, I personally have only been doing this for about a year and a half. I mean, I produced commercials and did a lot of other stuff before, but this path of developing long form content, scripted doc stuff, etc., which is sort of as a producer to go down, even though you've got a team who's working on it and everyone else is working on it and researching it, but just general interest, and then you sort of start getting, it's like peeling the layers of an onion. And that process that I've now had with about 3 or 4 different subjects over the past 18 months or so has been fascinating. And you're right, I think you've had the pleasure of being able to do this for a while now. For me, I'm pinching myself going, wow, this is really my job, and it is a privilege and I absolutely love it. And I will check out the Muhammad Ali videos. I did watch one recently, which was, I can't remember what happened a few months ago when there was one that was going around, but I will check it out. Is there a Muhammad Ali YouTube channel, or is it
no,
just
it's
all?
just various
Okay,
clips and
cool.
things.
All right. And you talked about this whole sort of community aspect, and I see that you're sort of omnipresent in a lot of places, and you haven't gone down the clubhouse hole, and I suspect that part of it is to do with the fact your geography. Being in Oslo is not really conducive to that because it's primarily, I think, the fulcrum is PST. So basically, it's the folks in LA who are driving a lot of that. And if you're on the East Coast, you end up staying up really late. Luckily for me, or over here in India, you can catch that stuff in the morning. But I would imagine for you, you'd have to be up at like 4 in the morning to be catching a lot of that stuff. So I don't know if it's a good thing or a bad thing, but I think you're spared of a lot of it. But have you been on Clubhouse much?
I'm on Clubhouse thanks to you, and I must admit I haven't really deep dived into it as much as I expected to, and in a way I feel like I'm dealing with, because as I said, I deal with so much research when it comes to my working, and I'm currently writing various films and developing shows, and so I feel like I'm letting a lot of information in and I'm absorbing. And so I'm also kind of being protective of my time and my space and my information overload.
Right.
Um, and I think that's also something to be said for knowing when to take social media breaks and how to just give yourself the space. And I know that on weekends we have to go into the woods and go skiing or do some type of physical activity or go for long walks and walk the dog, or because that distance and the connection to nature have been incredibly healthy for me. So I'm probably missing a lot of wonderful things on Clubhouse, but the good thing is that I have enough friends on it who are telling me what I missed. So
Absolutely. And I would trade, I mean, any day I would trade cross country skiing every weekend over Clubhouse. I mean, I'm totally envious, especially sitting here in Bombay, which has like a winter that lasts 2.5 minutes. It's over already. And seeing you do that every weekend is phenomenal. Can't wait to do that at some point. And
I'm not very good, but I'm just I'm
say
just
you were good. I
enthusiastic.
can't tell. You have us fooled on Insta, though, which both you and I and our teams are super excited about. It's been, literally just to tell our audience the story. For those of you who don't follow it, Brown History on Instagram. It is started by a guy out of Montreal, now in Toronto, a guy named Asan Zafar, who started it about 3 years ago as it was really a personal project to connect with his heritage. And he started posting some photos and talking, it was family photos from maybe a couple of decades ago, or whatever. And then other people started sending in stuff, and it just gained traction and became this amazing repository of South Asian stories, India, Pakistan, Bangladesh, Sri Lanka, Nepal, and other parts of South Asia as well, across decades, starting from the early 1900s, going all the way, and not just his stories, everyone's stories, and fascinating stories that even as people who, tend to know generally quite a lot about their heritage and culture and history, we were just like, wow, I mean, every story is fascinating, either because it connects personally and goes really micro on, like, so say the life and journey of a couple or a historical event in the background. So anyway, I won't describe more of it, but you should take a look at it on Instagram. It's Brown History. And so we started talking to Hassan about making Brown History into a show. And in the first 24 hours, I was like, oh, wait, Shruti, you have to come and talk about this. And so within a few days, I think, or actually it took Shruti like 2 minutes to say, yeah, totally, I'm in. And then we have been, so we are working together with Asan to take Brown History onto screen and build an on-screen franchise with it. And it is super exciting because it connects at a very sort of deep level personally. And also it is, I mean, it's like you don't even have to, when as a producer, when you go in and talk to like a streamer or a network about when you're pitching a show, you generally talk about why now. I'm like, we should just leave that why now blank. You don't even have to talk about it. So that's what excites me about it. Shruti, what's exciting for you about it?
I mean, what's incredible about Brown History is obviously the stories themselves that represent South Asia in general and the migration and movement of people. Because at least in the US media, there is such a predominance of this Indian Hindu majority when it comes to the storytelling. And there are so many levels and layers to what South Asia and brown people represent. And a lot of people don't know that. And so what Brown History really encapsulate it is this connectedness that these various countries have, but then also the specificities that each country or like community of people also represent. And that incredible rich tapestry, when put together, really becomes Brown History.
Right.
And so it's amazing to have a platform that celebrates Sri Lankan stories or stories from the Caribbean, so, the diaspora in the Middle East, which, you and I have been a part of when we met, as people growing up there because our parents moved there for work. And so a lot of people don't necessarily understand that expat experience, or what was it like when, you had like a poor British woman in India at a certain time it's like, and like Anglo-Indian communities, these are communities that are disappearing and they're dying. And I think it's really incredible what Asan has been able to do, and for us to be able to work with him to figure out the best way to tell these stories that also, at the same time, while being incredibly entertaining, dive into the authenticity of the characters themselves and their complexity, instead of kind of, there's this idea of Hollywooding it up, which essentially in my mind means dumbing it down to make it easy to understand. And therein lies our greatest problem when it's come to how culture has been represented in Hollywood films. I mean,
Absolutely.
Apparently every guy from the Middle East is, a terrorist. And that is a big problem in terms of like what it's done, not just for Arabs, but also for Muslims. And we have to counter also that representation of South Asians to get people to understand our own history and the layers there. I mean, what's also been amazing is the community that Asan's built, because so much of it are stories that he, obviously puts out, but so many community members start to share about their own. And it is in these shared experiences that we create, our own encyclopedia.
Absolutely. And I think what else is really exciting, both for you and for me, for this is the fact that the way that we want to tell these stories, even though they're historical and they go into, go back a few decades to a whole century ago, I think there is an opportunity here to tell them in a very, very contemporary manner while being true to, we were talking about how Atlanta and I May Destroy You are their own things, which have never been done before. I don't know what we're going to achieve with this because we're at the beginning of this, but those are benchmarks to aspire to do something completely original in the way that we tell these stories. And so I think we're pretty excited about that as well. Yeah.
I find it super random that I happened to look down at my phone just when an email came in right now during this conversation, Roopak, and I made the mistake of looking down at my phone. But I'm glad I did, because I've just forwarded to you and told you that this is the next TV series we're going to make. So I think
Oh, wow.
So it's a book we have to option, so I'm not going to bring it up on air.
Okay.
But there are no coincidences.
Awesome.
I happen to get this email right now, which,
Totally.
as you were saying, we're going to figure out our next things. I think the next thing just found us in this moment.
So we better get this episode done with so we can talk about this without any inhibition. So before we go, two questions I want to ask you. One, and this is a hat tip to Tim Ferriss because I haven't figured out my Flux Navigator's closing question yet. And until I do, I'm going to lean into his, which is, if you had the opportunity to put your message on a billboard for everyone in the world to see, what would it be?
I guess I would say, why not?
Why not? Yeah. Why the hell not? That's awesome. And Shruti, where do people reach you? If people want to find you online, how do they do that? Or mail you? Or
our company website is honto88.com, honto88.com. It showcases our work, the people on the team who are also incredible filmmakers that I have the luxury of interacting with and learning from every day. And people, there's a way for people to contact us through the site, and we look forward to hearing from folks.
Awesome. And you want people to follow you on Insta?
People can follow me on the gram.
Okay.
And that's at SHRUTIRYA at Shruti Ria.
Okay, awesome. And she's on Twitter too. So follow her everywhere. This has been really cool. Thank you so much for doing this. And And yeah, we will continue to talk as soon as we stop recording because I can't wait to talk about whatever you just sent me right now. So thanks, Shruti, and we will talk soon.
Well, this is perfect timing because my puppy has just woken up. So we were able to do this whole podcast recording within his nap. Good
Compliant
job,
thespian. He shall henceforth be named. Awesome. Cool. Thanks.
Thank you for having me, Roopak.
Thank you.